Yeah, it's interesting the conversation you guys were having, and I want to take a little bit of a perhaps an unorthodox stance in addressing this. Um, and I guess I kind of take issue with how some of these are defined. Like miracles are kind of defined out of existence, and I think the way that you define miracles, I disagree with the way that you define miracles. At least in the context of like the Bible, right? If that's what you're referring to, like stuff like that.
So I say that a miracle is an unexplainable supernatural event. What do you say it is? Excuse me.
I would say it's something that demonstrates the power of a deity or a mediator for a deity over and against another. So like,
But they wield supernatural powers.
they may be supernatural, may not be supernatural.
Well, well then that okay. So here's where I think that you and I actually do agree because I think this can be dissected and I think you'll agree with this. You hear a lot of. I remember when I was younger, there was a National Geographic, or maybe it was his. I think it was the History Channel. Actually, they did this big like 2 hour special on the 10 plagues of Egypt, right?
Hmm.
And they argued that the 10 plagues could have been like these naturally occurring events. So they weren't saying Moses didn't exist. There's no such thing as God. The Exodus didn't happen. What they were saying instead was, well, the river didn't literally turn into blood. It was an algae bloom because algae blooms sometimes are red. And when the algae bloomed, it killed all the fish, and that caused all the frogs to leave the water. So we get the plague of frogs. And then there could have been a drought, which caused all the crops to die, and then the livestock die. That's one of the plagues. A lunar eclipse could have happened. That is, or sorry, a solar eclipse could have happened. That is day turning into night. The hellfire raining down. They don't have. They thought maybe it was a meteor shower, and they just like it turned hyperbolic over time into like what actually happened. The death of the firstborn could have been caused by a type of fungus that grows on top of your stored grain, and the oldest child would be the first to eat, so they would get the grain from so they went through all of it. Now the problem with that, to me, is from a theological perspective, is you have now just sort of, I mean, you've reduced the significance of the events because they're supposed to be miracles. This is God intervening in order to, prop up Moses and lead the exile and all of this stuff, right? If you argue that, some of the things that Jesus did weren't, I don't know if you can, I think when the coffee
Yeah,
cup,
I
okay,
agree.
can you hear me?
Someone
Okay.
started playing. I
So
kind
if
of
you
paused it.
argue that, well, Jesus didn't really heal the blind person, he just like smacked him in the back of the head and it caused their brain to rewire or whatever. What you do when you do that from a theological perspective is you undermine the divinity of Jesus. And I think that's like really not the point, right?
Mm, um, I would say this. I think that what's not the point is the supernatural natural divide itself. So, like the point
But
of
if
the
it's
plagues.
natural, then there's no reason to believe Jesus was God.
Well,
That's
I mean,
that's that's a
um,
much more direct rebuttal to it.
wait, wait, wait,
And if
wait,
that's
wait,
the
wait.
case, then why believe in Christianity at all?
Okay, okay, so like I guess we'll talk about one set versus another set, because there's three classes of what we would call miracles, and when I just answered this, I was talking about the plagues. So like so the way I answered that was in the class of miracles that a plague would be, which is my God is stronger than your God. So Jesus healing somebody, I don't think is an example of my God is stronger than your God.
Right. So you're talking about when Moses throws his staff to the ground and it creates the snakes and the
Yes, yes,
supposedly Pharaoh's whatever's
magicians,
priests were
magicians.
doing the same sort of thing.
Yeah,
Sure, but that's still a supernatural event
yeah, but
because
the point.
staffs don't turn into snakes.
But what I'm saying though, okay, so like it may
as far as
be
we
a
know.
supernatural event, it may not be a supernatural event, but the point of the people who wrote the text was not the supernatural natural divide, but my God is stronger than your God.
That I mean, for the Old Testament, I can agree with that, but with the New Testament, Jesus is, I mean, if you ask a lot of biblical scholars, they'll tell you Jesus didn't actually call himself God any like explicitly anywhere in the Bible. That was done by, the people like a couple centuries later, like the Council of Nicaea and whatever, where they came up with the Nicene Creed, where they, I'm pretty sure that's what it is, otherwise known as the Apostles' Creed. I think that's right. Maybe I'm
They
wrong,
know
but
it's the Nicene Creed.
okay, where they say like, he was begotten, not made, one in being with the Father, through him all things were made, blah, blah, like that whole thing, right? That's where they took their interpretation of it. So Jesus literally has to be God, for Christianity to work. So this is different than, this is way different than that Old Testament perspective. So like I brought up the 10 plagues because that was a TV show I had saw, and other people have probably heard that before. But if we just go back to the Jesus thing, like saying what he did wasn't him like wielding his supernatural, omniscient, godly powers, then it's just like, well, then why should I believe Jesus was God? Why should I even be a Christian? So I think sort of like playing around with like what the definition of a miracle is, to me, I mean, it almost seems like fatalistic from a Christian perspective, you know?
It could be fatalistic and it could be a losing battle. But here, I guess this is why I press it, is because there is no such word as miracle in the entire Bible. And so when we're doing this, we
Probably
are,
not, yeah.
yeah, so it's like when we're talking about it in this way, with the supernatural natural divide and using the word miracle, this is something that we're imposing upon the text, like anachronistically. And so like,
Yeah, sure.
um, and so another type of miracle, quote unquote, is like a sign. And so that would be like where this is an indication of something, like so an eclipse can be a sign. Or like if you look at the clock and it says 11:11, that's a sign, that type
Okay.
of thing. And it may be silly, but that's like how they actually used it though. Like they would have incantation
No, yeah,
bowls.
people are not inclined to believe that uh, coincidences are the explanation for things.
Right.
We we
And
want
so
us we want there to be a story rather than a non-story, and a coincidence is not much of a story.
right. And it's a desire to have a personal relationship with reality itself or your being. Like you find the love of your life. The last thing you want to believe is that the next day after you find the love of your life, that she just gets hit by a car. You want to believe that there's significance to life, in some type of story like that. We don't like the mortality of life itself.
Right. Which is why people say things like "thank God."
Yes, they
Yeah.
say thank God. And so I guess the reason I'm emphasizing this is because I think signs, powers, and wonders do exist and they do happen. It's just a question of whether they're natural versus supernatural. And to define it as only the supernatural is not addressing like the biblical definition itself.
I mean, it just sounds like kind of like Peterson just said. It sounds like just taking God out of it, though, right? Like
Um,
it sounds like there's no need for God if you can just explain it naturally.
I mean, like, if you
um,
believed in a non-interventionist God who still has like omniscience, he knows everything that will ever happen, but he doesn't intervene in the world. He still is responsible for all the things that will happen. So,
yeah.
I mean, you could
So,
you could
so
credit him, but then
this,
it's kind of like, well, it's not really a miracle. Like if God made a rock appear in his hand, that would be a miracle. But then if he rolled the ball down a hill, well, the ball rolling down the hill isn't a miracle, but the rock couldn't have existed without God like miraculously making it appear. So if God miraculously created this universe but doesn't intervene in it, then it's accurate to say thank God, and it's because of God. But like you're saying, it's not really an actual miracle; it's a sign. But then other people would just say everything is a miracle. So it's kind of like,
So it
yeah.
sounds more like Spinonism, where it's a God is nature, nature is God. It's not a necessarily a being that interacts with us.
Yeah, I guess more of what I'm saying is that I don't like the divide itself. So I don't think that God is either supernatural or natural. I think he can be both. So I'm not rejecting the supernatural itself, but to say that God is only the supernatural, that's what I'm rejecting. So like, and here's an example why I reject that.
Okay, go ahead.
Um, People who are Christians sometimes have that divide, and the way that happens is God is the supernatural, and everything else, the natural, is not God. So when you have a Christian who believes that way, and then their child gets sick, they're like, "No, God's going to heal him," and God can't heal their child through the doctor because guess what? That's natural. So the supernatural natural divide causes people to not want to take their kids to the doctor because God does not work through the doctor. God only works through miracles, and
Right. Or yeah.
that's why I reject that.
Or not take a vaccine, or
Yeah,
stuff like that.
exactly. Like that is done. So God can't work through. So
Yeah.
like if you get a vaccine, God can't you can't work through that vaccine, and that's why I don't like that divide.
Well, most people are just hypocrites and they don't know it. Like they seek medical care, and their child gets medical care, and they get a surgery and whatever, but then they still say, "Oh, thank God." Yeah, So it's like, well, I'm gonna let you have your cake and eat it too, because it's your child and this is important to you, but I'm gonna be over here like, yeah, I'm pretty sure the medicine is is what did it, is
Yeah,
what
the
worked.
surgeon just in the corner of the room sobbing.
Yeah.
He's like, "Really, man?"
Yeah. Yeah, so people have come on here and talked to me about this before, and I always tell them, like, in order to prove this, like, in order to verify that there are miracles going on here, what you'd have to do is you'd have to take an enormous group of people with a, we want to have as few variables as possible. So grab a huge group of people all with the exact same disease. Half of them just pray for them, don't do anything at all. The other half give them medical care and see what the difference is. Now you're going to see that the difference is overwhelmingly skewed towards the people that got the care, right? So that, but people obviously never think about doing that. And interestingly enough, there have been tests on, I have a book on statistics called The Art of Statistics. Most of it went over my head. But there actually was this really big study done on cardiac patients. And the patients who were prayed for actually did slightly worse. And we don't really know exactly what was going on, but we think it may have actually been a negative placebo effect because they were being prayed for. They considered themselves in dire straits, which would definitely lead to more stress hormone being released by the body, which taxes the body's ability to take care of itself. So,
Yeah, that's actually a good, interesting point because in that case, it would seem as though the the supernatural or miracle manifests in the placebo effect itself.
well, you could claim that it does. I mean, there are people that I actually had somebody talked to me about this exact same. I can't remember. We talked about this forever. We talked about the placebo effect, and he was saying like, well, this wasn't really about miracles, I don't think, but he was saying like the placebo effect is the mind altering reality. I was like, no, not really, because if I want to pick up this agate, I have to use my brain to do that. And now I picked up this agate. The state of things in this universe is now different, but my mind didn't cause that in that direct sort
Mm,
of way.
yeah.
All of my guests tonight have been extremely polite and intelligent people. This is not normally what happens here.
Yeah, he's like, "Come on, give me some content."
I last night I was talking to some guy that thought he didn't think the Earth was flat, but he thought that the Tychonian system was the system that we live in, and I kept having to tell him, "Daddy, chill," and he so
Yeah.
this is way better.
Yeah. Well, so actually, besides just attribution, like what you attribute it to, how do you differentiate between the placebo effect and magic?
How do I differentiate between them? Well, I mean, I reject the existence of I reject the existence of magic. The placebo effect, although it's probably in most cases impossible to describe what exactly happened. In principle, we can actually have hypotheses about the placebo effect. You can't have a hypothesis about magic. All you can do is claim that magic exists. Because the reason you can't have a hypothesis about magic is because there's no way to explain it. And that's what a hypothesis is. You would just have to say magic happened. You know,
There's actually
there's no formula, there's no equation, there's no reciprocity, or not reciprocity, but you can't reciprocate it. So that's the biggest difference to me.
And I
So,
was actually going to
so
say there's a really good video on exactly this. It was made by Vsauce, if you know who that is, Michael Stevens. It was for his minefield thing.
yeah.
It's called The
All
Power
right.
of Suggestion, and it talks about exactly how placebos work. Well, at
Hmm.
least as far as they know, they actually have like three kids that they bring in. One with eczema, another one who got like a concussion and was having severe migraines, and another kid who had like ADHD. And they brought them all in, and just through the power of suggestion, they were able to help these kids. So it was kind of cool. It's on YouTube for free. It used to cost money, but now it's completely free.
Yeah.
Oh, are
I know
all the
pretty much
minefields? Nice.
I know pretty much every Vsauce video ever made.
They're
That's
so
like
good.
a,
Yeah, it breaks
yeah,
my
it's
heart
really,
that he basically does nothing now, but
He's on TikTok under the name Corndog Willie.
yeah, I've seen a few videos, and all the videos I've seen are just commercials to buy the Curiosity box. So I'm just kind of like, eh.
oh, I forgot about that thing. Yeah, he started shilling that like crazy.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. It seems like there's two things that you differentiate. So like the attribution, it's not placebo isn't a miracle because you don't attribute it to magic. But then
right.
also you don't like the fact that science gives affords you more explanatory power than the heuristic of something like magic, which I think has an explanation, but it's not a scientific theory. But it can have an explanation, like the influence of the planets, like Venus is in whatever's some shit like that.
Well, that wouldn't be magic though.
Astrology wouldn't be like magic,
Um, I guess I wouldn't consider it magic.
huh?
Not really. But if you're proposing, well, see, I've argued about astrology before too, and in fact, I used to have on here astrology is nonsense. I think that used to be on there, and people would be like, "Why?" And I'd be like, "Because like I read my horoscope and it was kind of accurate." It's like, yes, but nowhere in astrology is there a causal mechanism behind what's happening. Like Venus and Earth line up on this date, and therefore blank. Why therefore blank? Because like if I drop an object, I can describe mathematically what it will do, right? In science, we have actual like there are equations behind the vast majority of all scientific theories and mechanisms that describe change. With astrology, that doesn't exist. It's just basically the claims themselves.
Hmm.
It's
Yeah, I
just like
guess I
vague
would think.
explanations.
But and so like magic is similar to that, but I wouldn't.
Because the causal, I guess, because the causal part may not be there, but I think the scrying, like if you look into a flame and it's gonna like give you some insight, or a water reflection is like looking at the stars and reading like the tea leaves of the stars, some shit like that.
Right. Oops. Sorry.
Every time it's
Stupid
that one.
buttons are right next to each other. It's the dumbest thing in the world. Okay. Well, do you have any other questions?
Um, do you deny like all like ideas of God, or just like the kind of Abrahamic gods?
I don't believe in any of them.
So like the Gnostic pleroma, where God has like these perfect forms, like mathematical forms or something like that.
I don't even know what that means. So, uh, like I deny the existence of the supernatural. Whatever that is doesn't necessarily sound like it's supernatural. And if you want to call it God, then well, okay. But I to make it more simple, I just don't think that anything supernatural is real.
So like, do you okay? So like, this is some of the things that would exist in the pleroma, and you could tell me whether you think they're real, and then whether you think they're supernatural. So like a circle would be an example. So is a circle real, and then is it supernatural?
So circles have a definition. If does that make them real? I don't know. If you got two philosophers in the room, they would argue about this for an hour and a half, and no conclusions would be made because that's what philosophy is. So I don't know. I mean, it really exists in the minds of conscious creatures, and to us, that is the only kind of reality that there is, as far as we know. I mean, we assume that the external universe is real, but it's interpreted through our minds, right? And can ideas be so is an idea oh, this is interesting. So in English, nouns are people, places, things, and ideas, right? Is
Hmm.
an idea part of the universe? Well, in order to answer that question, we'd have to know what consciousness is, and we have no idea. But that's an extremely good question.
So yeah,
But
thank
I
you.
don't think
And
that that makes a circle supernatural.
well, I would say that it's definitely not a part of the natural world as
I
far as
wonder,
like exclusively,
right?
right?
I
I think
wonder
it's
if
like
we could call it epi-natural, which would mean like above natural. Now that wouldn't, to me, that wouldn't exactly be the same as supernatural, because like obviously there's a lot we don't know about consciousness, but we are as certain as we can be that it's the manifestation, the product of our physical brains, which are definitely part of the universe. So, therefore, it would be part of the universe, I guess, but just in such a weird way.
yeah. The reason why I think it's like supernatural is more based on that power aspect of God, because I think that circles are very powerful. Like the things that we use that utilize like the pattern of circularity, like rotating objects and like wheels, even so, like wheels give us so much power. And then like even right angles, like angles themselves, like knowing that like a lot of geometrical stuff give us like super like technological advantages, like even to tell time. So I feel like although those things are like in the mind of the human beings, it's almost like getting in touch with the supernatural to me. Like the geometrical shapes are the mind of God, I guess you could say.
Yeah, I mean, Plato's theory of forms is something like this, I think,
Yes, yeah.
in a way.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah. Do you not do how do you feel about that? Is that like something you're agnostic about, or do you like think it's stupid, or do you think it's cool, or what?
I think it's really, I don't think it's stupid. I think it's really interesting. But, and like for anybody that doesn't know, Plato's theory of forms, he maintains that there actually is such a thing as like the circle, the perfect triangle, the perfect this, that. And all objects in the universe are just imperfect conglomerations of all of those things put together. But the things themselves have to exist in some sort of like literal sense. Otherwise, well, I don't know exactly what his implications are. I don't think it's really true. I think it's the motivation behind a lot of modes of thinking that held us back, such as orthogenesis, which is the idea that the reason things happen is because they are progressing towards a goal. And if there are realized material or immaterial perfect forms of things, then, you know, existence would just be the idea of striving towards those ideals. This
Hmm.
also probably influenced ideas like the great chain of being, like there are objectively better and worse things, including forms of life on the planet. Angels are above humans, humans are above the other animals. There are hierarchies of animals, then plants are below that. Like the idea that a plant is objectively better than a rock is just like pretty silly to me,
Hmm.
right? So
Hmm.
I don't think it's really real, but it's really interesting.
And
Okay.
I think it really comes down to what I mean. How are you defining real in this case? Real as in, is there really such a thing as a perfect circle, or is it real as in a sense that we can perceive it? You know what I mean? Because I mean, obviously, we can look at planets and stuff, and from our perspective, it's going to seem like a circle. But again, I guess it really depends.
There's one person that can answer this, and it's Jordan Peterson. I'm Planet Peterson, so I can't answer this question.
Come on, man.
Wait,
Are you
It
wait,
sure?
depends what
do
you mean by real. So,
do you want me to get
unfortunately,
Jordan Peterson on here?
Yeah,
that
we
would be
can message
wild.
him.
Planet Peterson interviews Jordan
I
Peterson.
that I could. I mean, I've talked with him a couple times.
I
You
hear he's
have?
easy to
Um,
get in contact
yeah,
with on Twitter.
actually, I could change my image to a picture of me and him messing around doing Karate Kid.
Huh? That's interesting.
Yeah, but actually,
I
I'm
mean,
thinking about
you
getting.
can send. I don't think he would ever talk to me, but that would be pretty damn cool if he did. But
Right now, he's like seems to be tied up on stuff. I'm talking to some of his colleagues, so I don't know when he's going to be available, but no, that'll be funny. That'll be cool.
I mean,
Anyway,
just DM me on TikTok or Instagram or whatever. If the opportunity, I would not pass up the opportunity. So
all right.